I don't need the gavel, it's too quiet. I think it's 8:30. Okay, we'll go ahead and call our meeting to order. Sheila, could you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ron Lieberman? Ryan Benson?
Here.
Sandra Einhorn?
Here.
Mario Facella?
Here.
David Hall?
Here.
Dev Matwani?
Here.
And our new DEO designee, Ben Melnick.
Here.
Thank you. Just an announcement, we are being live streamed on Florida Housing's YouTube channel. So y'all are on camera, mostly this half of the room. And we have, once again, a new court reporter today, Mary. So if y'all could just speak loudly and, clearly, that would help her out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Boy, this is the first time in a while we've had all the board members. They must have wanted to come to the cold. Okay, any public comment about anything that's on the agenda? I see none. Okay, I need a motion on the minutes.
Motion. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Approval of the consent agenda. Trey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have reached out to the board members and asked for any items from the consent agenda, which we presented to you last Friday. I have not heard from any board members that any consent items shall be pulled, and I'll give them one more opportunity to do that now.
I just have one general, question. For a lot of the consent items that were extensions, a lot of them had reasoning as COVID-related. I just wondered if those reasons were specifically outlined to the corporation as to, what the reasoning was.
I'll answer that if that's okay, Trey. I think between myself and David Westcott on some CDBG DR items that also had extensions, I can probably speak for both of us. We do ask for specificity in COVID-related reasons, and it is provided to the corporation, so we do dig in further in the due diligence of whether we're going to recommend an extension. A lot of those COVID-related delays relate back to perhaps permitting offices being closed, short staff on those side of things, either whether it's local government or HUD, or issues that have related to supply chains. So there's we see a commonality among those, but we do dig deeper and don't just take that broad justification.
Right, and due to that being out of their control, that's why we're good with waiving the fees.
Yes, and I anticipate that those circumstances, you may continue to see more of that. We want to be as flexible as we can, and we understand that we're just seeing it across the board, yes. And that's the justification.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I need a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? Okay. Audit Committee, Mario.
Thank you. The Audit Committee meeting convened on Thursday, January 20th, 2022. The first order of business was approving the minutes from the December 9th, 2021 meeting. The Audit Committee approved the 2022 Office of Inspector General and the Audit Committee charters. We also had Ernst & Young present and to the Audit Committee to kick off 2021 financial audit of the corporation. And finally, performance evaluations for the Inspector General and the Executive Director were presented.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mario. External Affairs, Stephanie.
Good morning. Excuse me. I am going to talk about some of the bills that we are following during the legislative session, as well as the... I love speaking in front of people. Okay, so we have some bills that we are tracking, and I was going to talk about the governor's housing budget recommendations. So very quickly, the governor's 2023, 2022, 2023 budget recommendation is $355.5 million for housing, $95 million for the SAIL program, $20 million set aside for Monroe County workforce housing, 20% of the appropriated funds for serving people with developmental disabilities. The SHIP program would receive $220.5 million, and there was also $40 million that was vetoed last year that he has set aside for homeownership, down payment, and closing cost assistance, $40 million. Then moving on to some of the bills that we are tracking right now, we have our bill, which is moving this year, moving better than last year. We have the same sponsors, Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez from Miami-Dade County and Representative Roth from Palm Beach County. This would streamline our real estate transaction processes and get the corporation away from having to go to the governor and cabinet, sitting as the State Board of Administration. As I have said before, when I was a cabinet aide, they used to hold meetings every 2 weeks, and it was a pretty set cycle, very routine. And now they might meet 4, 6, maybe 8 times a year. So it's made our transactions slow down when we have bonds related. So we're trying to get that eliminated. And then the bonds would come to the board. The other bill that we are tracking is Senate Bill 884 and House Bill 537. This is a bill that is by Senator Boyd and Representative Mooney. This is fees in lieu of security deposits, which is a new concept to me. It amends the Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, and it allows people who don't have the security deposit money up front to pay a fee, a monthly fee instead. And what the bill does is requires the landlord to give the tenant all of the legalese up front so that they know what they're getting into. But the fees don't apply to the security deposit. It doesn't appear that there's any cap. Of course, I just read the bill. I didn't have a chance to go back and actually put it into a statute. But it doesn't look like the fees apply to a security deposit. They can terminate the agreement to pay the fee if they do have the security deposit in full. So we're just keeping an eye on this one. This bill is moving. It's my understanding that this practice is already in place. I just never heard of it before. The House bill only has one more committee stop, and the Senate bill has 2, I believe. The next bill that we are following is Senate Bill 1150 and House Bill 495. It's a tax exemption for affordable housing. Again, Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez and Representative Rodriguez are sponsors. The bill would allow a county or municipality to adopt an ordinance that would grant a partial property tax exemption for property with at least 50 units, and 10% of those units would be set aside for affordable. They would get a 75% property tax exemption. If it was 100% affordable, then they would receive 100% property tax exemption. That bill has been heard in one committee, and the House bill has not yet been heard. The next bill that I'm sure you all are familiar with is Senate Bill 1170 and House Bill 1553, State Housing Assistance Programs by Senator Brandis and Representative Blaken. As Trey told Senator Brandis, this bill makes him sad. It repeals SAIL and the Community Workforce Housing Program. It renames and restructures the SHIP program. It is now called, in the bill, State Housing Initiatives Partnership Block Grant Program. It removes municipalities from receiving direct allocations. It would only grant money to the counties, and then the counties could enter into agreements with the municipalities. And it adds housing choice vouchers as an acceptable use of SHIP funds. And it also increases the minimum to the local governments from $350,000 to $500,000. So far, that bill has not been heard. The last one I was going to mention is Senate Bill 1746. This one is a constitutional amendment. So it's Senate Bill 1746 and House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1748 and House Bill 1563. It's Senator Broder and Representative Tom Cow. It proposes a constitutional amendment to allow for an additional homestead property tax exemption on $50,000 of the assessed value of a homestead property owned by classroom teachers, law enforcement officers, correctional officers, child welfare service professionals, active duty military, and members of the National Guard. So this bill popped actually on the first day of session, and it was in response to the Realtors Hometown Heroes program. So they got a Senate sponsor, Senator Hooper, and we're working on getting a House sponsor and thought they'd secured one, but in the end, the House decided to take a different approach and go with a constitutional amendment to propose the homestead property tax exemption for classes of professionals. So that bill is moving next week in Community Affairs. And that's my update.
Couple questions.
Okay.
You see Senator Brandis's bill going anywhere?
Hasn't moved yet,
Okay.
but you never know.
Yeah, it's our understanding that his bill is not a priority of the Senate leadership. That's the,
Okay, well, that's good news. Secondly, the governor's housing budget. Any feedback from the legislature on?
We're here, we have not heard anything other than what the agreement was last year, which is that they are not going to be sweeping trust funds this year. And they're starting to build their budgets. But based on the call we had yesterday with some other folks who are tracking closely, it sounds like things are moving along well
Okay,
in allocations, so
all right.
that's good.
Any questions?
I just have one. Senate Bill 884, you were talking about with the fee for security deposit. Who do that fee go to? And as a landlord, are they required to keep that in an account that's not gaining interest? So how is that supposed to work?
I don't know the answer to that.
I can step in a little bit and we can get you more information.
Yeah, we can
So
get you more information.
this legislation is being pushed by a company called Lieu. And it's my understanding that these are agreements between that company and the landlord. And the landlord, it's a service that they provide that has to do with insurance for damages to the property. Because what's not being paid by the tenant is the additional month's rent for a security deposit. That's what essentially the company is putting forward, kind of as it was explained to me, David, like an insurance policy.
Okay.
And so then, in the agreement between the tenant and the landlord, they've agreed to a fee in lieu of the additional month's rent, and that's how they proceed. So it's also on our understanding that these agreements are already occurring, out there. And I'm trying to get to what we need a little better understanding of is why the legislation may be necessary. So we'll be happy to get you additional information.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Hugh Brown, we have one item.
Good morning. Before you today is the matter of HTG Oasis LLC versus Florida Housing Loss on 36 Limited, Cocoa Palms Place, and Cocoa Palms Place LP, case number 2021-084BP. This case arises out of RFA 2021-203, that is the Housing Credit RFA for Miami-Dade County. The named parties, along with another called Princeton Palms, submitted applications in response to this RFA. After scoring, Cocoa Palm Place was selected for funding, and the others were found eligible but did not rank high enough to be selected for funding. Oasis then filed a petition challenging the eligibility of Cocoa Palm Place, Princeton Palms, and the Lofts on 36, and the case was sent to the Division of Administrative Hearings for trial. Prior to the hearing, the parties agreed and stipulated that Lofts on 36, Cocoa Palm Place, and Princeton Palms were all ineligible for funding. After a brief hearing in December, where the parties presented a joint proposed recommended order, the judge issued her own recommended order, which is before you today for consideration. In it, she recommends that the board find that Cocoa Palm Place, Princeton Palms, and Lofts on 36 are ineligible for funding and selecting Oasis for funding, subject to credit underwriting. There are no exceptions filed regarding this recommended order, and the parties have all agreed to the disposition of this case. Therefore, staff recommends the board adopt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendation of this order and issue a final order accordingly. Thank you.
Okay. I need a motion on staff recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion, a second. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Marissa Button.
Thank-
Multifamily, item A.
Thank you. This is the 2022 rule development item. We are asking for your authorization to begin rule development by scheduling a rule development workshop for comments on our Rule Chapter 6748, which is over all of our competitive multifamily programs, 6721, which is our non-competitive programs, and 6760, which is the rules governing our solicitation process for the RFA process. And that also includes our qualified allocation plan that's referenced in Rule Chapter 6748. So what we'll be doing is beginning with the workshopping, and we'll go through a process of public feedback and comment, and we'll be coming back to you with that. We anticipate, we want to have the rule workshop, as the item says, February 17th. And depending on how that goes, sometimes we do more than one workshop, depending on the items that come up. But ideally, we're coming back to you with approval of the any changes by the April board meeting. And then that tees us up really well for the next funding cycle that will occur a couple months after that. And we aren't anticipating many significant changes to the rules. We have there's always some cleanup items that we do, but we will be talking through with our stakeholders and with our underwriting firms about ways where we can look at, considering the current environment, providing flexibility for developments while maintaining the scrutiny that we have in our rules. And so we're looking forward to a good conversation in that regard. And that's my item. So our recommendation is for you to authorize us to proceed with the 2022 rule development. Thank you.
Okay, I need a motion to staff recommendation.
Motion.
Second.
I have a motion second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Item B.
Okay, item B is our request regarding the development of an RFA to pilot financing of permanent supportive housing in concert with state behavioral healthcare services funding, which is a mouthful. So I'm going to call it Pilot 2.0, because as y'all remember, we had a really successful, and I'm going to be looking to Bill a lot, and we're kind of joint here if you have additional questions, but very successful pilot 1.0 in the past couple years. And so you'll recall in July this past year, those of you who were with us for that meeting, you approved our request to carry out a formal discussion about a pilot concept to pair our housing development financing with services funding to serve residents in need of permanent supportive housing. And that we agreed, after doing some due diligence on that, we'd come to you with some recommendations. And so since that time, Florida Housing staff has discussed the pilot concept with Florida Department of Children and Families, its lead agencies and service providers, and others in the stakeholder community that were receiving services from DCF. There were public workshops. One was held in October to outline preliminary ideas and get a lot of public feedback about this concept. And we're here, obviously, today to present to you that we believe it's beneficial to look towards developing an RFA for this. The new pilot would serve adults referred by managing entities that agree to partner with a developer that's going to apply under the RFA. So there is this concept of the partnership process within that. And it would focus on diverting high-risk, high-cost individuals from repeated emergency and acute care services with no progress to stabilization, recovery, and greater self-sufficiency with their own communities. And so the focus of the pilot aspect of this RFA would be on residents who are not literally homeless before move-in, but really facing that housing instability due to their behavioral health care situation. And so we have some key objectives with regard to that, and you have a lot set forth in your materials. I don't want to read everything verbatim to you, but we are available if you have more questions about the intricacies of what all of that would involve. And really, based off of our experiences with the first pilot, we think it would be ideal to fund up to 3 developments in this concept. And as your materials reflect, applicants and their managing entity partners through that application process would be evaluated on certain areas. The applicant's experience with a sustainable model of operating housing and integrating housing with services coordination for high-needs populations with behavioral health disorders. Do I need to be louder? Oh, I'm sorry. I was directed by the chair to, I will speak slower, thank you, and sorry.
We're used to it.
Yeah, you asked. The process the applicant and the managing entity would use to carry out tenant referral and tenant selection for these high utilizer consumers that are served by the partnering managing entity, so that's a component that's going to be evaluated as well, and what the managing entity would bring to the partnership and its commitment with the applicant, and the applicant's experience providing residents with immediate access on move-in to supports related to develop and maintaining their housing stability. And so the applicants, just like Pilot 1.0, the applicants chosen under this pilot, including the housing provider and the managing entity, would be required to commit to work with Florida Housing throughout the pilot period with a collaboration, peer conversations, and written information to develop and regularly report on these resident outcomes, which, as you remember, what was so important about the first pilot. And this will provide the state with ideas for how to best proceed in the future to braid those housing and services funding opportunities. And another thing to note, so this is a pilot within an RFA, right? So residents that are the focus of this pilot aspect of the RFA will make up a limited portion of the overall tenants that will ultimately be served at the development. There will be additional units that will be set aside for persons who are experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, or have housing stability, and there will not be a complete set aside. There will be general occupancy units as well in this holistic development. That's the vision that we have. And so I'm going to reel back even a little bit more and remind you that this is, you are authorizing us to proceed, with a workshop and develop this RFA. There could be more than one workshop. We're part of the funding that's associated with this is the home ARP plan dollars, which you have on a later item in the agenda. So that plan still has to go through and be approved by HUD, which Bill will be talking about, but that's a component of the funding relative to this RFA. We also believe that it's, as this has been a priority of the board in looking at how to make the proposed developments feasible, that it makes sense to add a portion of 9% low-income housing tax credits. So you see that in the recommendation as well, in addition to National Housing Trust Fund dollars. And so, I just want to really address that this is not, your approval of this concept and us going forward with developing an RFA does not have to be a all-out commitment of those credits per se, or what the actual dollar amounts are going to look like, because I'm going to be coming to you later in the spring with the QAP and talking through, where the credits are coming through for the next funding cycle. We really wanted to get in front of this and provide this item to you today because we're working through getting the HUD-approved plan as well, and we want to hit the ground running once we have all these approvals. We want to do the workshopping regarding the coordination between the housing developers and the managing entities. And so, while it may feel like a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, we're just trying to tee everything up. So I imagine we'll continue to have a discussion about the financing component of this. But with that, I will hopefully I slowed down a little bit. We're asking for your recommendation to approve the implementation of this pilot program through our development workshop and ultimate issuance of an RFA, and approve the estimated reservations of those resources there in the item. Thank you.
Okay, can I have a motion to staff recommendation?
Motion.
I'll make a second, because I do have some comments, Chairman.
Okay,
We're running early, so I feel like I can make the comment. Yes, you have a second. Yes. First, I want to, again, acknowledge staff for this RFA. I'm glad that 1.0 is going well, and we're going to do it again for 2.0. Certainly, this demographic desperately needs permanent supportive housing. These are folks that are cycling in and out of hospitals and jails, and so this is so much more beneficial and cost-effective. I shared with staff yesterday my two concerns. One, that eligible applicants would be 100% nonprofits, and so I appreciated the staff feedback on that. And certainly, I want to reiterate what Marissa just said, that what we're committing to is not final, set in stone. I did have some reservations about using competitive housing credits to ensure that that stays within the 5% board priority as opposed to pulling from other places. But again, thank you, staff. This is really exciting, and I look forward to 2.0. That's it, Chairman.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? I've got a quick question. This type of housing, supportive housing, is sometimes difficult to get done. What is the timing on all these different sources of funding? Do we have any?
Yes, as I think from what Marissa was, thank you, Marissa, was mentioning with trying to, pair, 2 to 3 funding resources that we, really need, especially when we're looking at, one of the goals is that we've learned, over the years doing permanent supportive housing and kind of it's evolving, the advocates, and we had, early on decided we need the unit, so it'll be 100% or 80% set aside. The entire development will serve persons with special needs. We realize that the operations are difficult to serve, high needs and persons with special needs in one setting for the entire department, the development. The other piece is it's better to deconcentrate that population and integrate into the community. So saying that to answer your question, Mr. Chair, it was very interesting to try to integrate all the requirements from 2 to 3 funding sources, as you'll hear when I talk, next on the home ARP. So as Marissa said, we're trying to get in front of it because it is a lot to work out, and we want to be ready to hit the ground running when we get our home, especially our home ARP resources, because as you hear, there are timelines with that funding. And that's why we're also looking to find the best applicants who have already had experience working with the managing entities, serving these clients, as well as having the development experience. So not only the development process, but the lease up, working with the managing entity moves pretty efficiently and effectively to really be able to meet those timelines we're going to be up against.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Marissa, for the explanation on the approval of getting an RFA. Along the lines of what Ron said, will we be able to see an RFA at our next meeting? Or how long for this to actually turn into something in front of us with more specific criteria?
So what usually happens is when the board authorizes an RFA, it delegates the aside from some of these big picture items and the financing that goes along with it, we usually go ahead and proceed, workshop, and issue. The uniqueness about this of what you'll see is a recommendation about the source yet again. So when we come to you with the QAP, for instance, if we're going forward and saying, okay, it really makes a lot of sense as we've estimated for this amount of credits to be associated with the development, when I come in and present the QAP to you, we'll talk through where those come from in the grand scheme of things. I can tell you right now, and this isn't exactly what you're asking, but I think it has come up, there's no concept where the what we'd recommend in this 9% that would, for 9% credits, that would impact our general occupancy RFAs. There's a few different options we can look at with you, but we do that really holistically. And we can update you, we'll probably be able to update you with any workshopping at a future board meeting if you'd like, because we intend to, we might end up having more than one workshop regarding this RFA, but typically you don't approve the language of the RFAs themselves.
Okay, that answered the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if I may add, this has been kind of unique. We have actually, since August, started really what we've been calling conceptual workshops, where we haven't got too far into the terms and the technical aspects, but it's basically, what is the intent? Who are going to be parties? How are we going to coordinate braiding, our housing resources with the Department of Children and Families and other resources for really providing intensive housing stability supports as that person is coming into housing, as they get acclimated to their housing, which we found in our first pilot. The success of housing retention and housing stability for this household really starts at intensive housing stability support even before they move in, to the point where it takes anywhere from 6 months to 18 months for the housing stability to be where they can then move on to their other address their other needs that may put them in homelessness or is causing the in and out of utilizing crisis services. But our plan, if the Board of Directors approve, I think our next step is that we would be holding the next workshop the beginning of February, again, to kind of stay up on the process. And that's where we'd like to first, we've been doing heavy agendas on concepts, but that's where we would like to now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marissa, is start issuing more of the terms and the other requirements, the applicant selection process to the stakeholder community and the public.
Okay, anything further?
I just wanted to touch on a couple things. And I too had, a little bit, some questions about the use of competitive housing credits, and Marissa and I spoke a little bit yesterday about it, and I appreciate that. But overnight I thought, just for my edification, why not use 4% non-competitive versus 9% competitive as a source?
Sure, and we did look at that. That would require, so it brings a different amount. It's really an analysis of the development overall and what the amount of equity is that comes into the development itself. And so Kevin, our Director of Development Finance, we all work together in looking at what made, the most sense for the greatest feasibility, and really determined that it made the most sense for the 9% credits to be used. And also because that 4% transaction is with multi-family mortgage revenue bonds, which are also a finite resource right now, both at a local level and a state level. And, there's different, abilities to use those in different markets. So I think we can continue to have that conversation, though. And when we workshop that, discuss that with developers and, where they may see some opportunities and think, this could be feasible in this way, we're still open to having that discussion. But as a first blush, we thought this made the most sense.
Okay, and so I think I heard that you'll be coming back to us with a final recommendation on sourcing?
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all right, anything further? Seeing none?
I have a question. The first pilot program, where is that located? And then also the other 3 pilot that you're, I guess, thinking about doing, has there been any interest somewhere, like specific around the state, where these other pilots will be?
The first pilot, which we actually began in 2014, with some resources allocation or an appropriation from the legislature, And again, really focusing on it's been a Florida Housing Strategic Plan strategy since 2014 to figure out how to work with the stakeholders and the funders, both on the housing side as the services funding side, to figure out how we can best serve households with special needs and homeless households who are the most vulnerable in the community and the most unstably housed, as well as those who are high utilizers of community crisis services, healthcare services, and Medicaid funding. So they're, a small portion of these high needs consumers utilize a lot of these crisis funds for everybody. And the focus for that one was the most vulnerable chronically homeless persons in a community. The 3 pilot sites, and the pilots are over, and we had issued last year a statewide cost benefits report on the three pilots, and they were in Jacksonville, Miami, and St. Petersburg. I can certainly share again the results for any board member who didn't hear the presentation at the time when the report was on the cost benefits. One of the biggest lessons learned, the cost too is the issue was that the legislature, funders, Department of Children and Families, other stakeholders wanted a Florida-specific study, not using information from Denver or Vermont, or we wanted Florida-specific based on our resources, our systems, how diverse the state of Florida is. And that's what we did. And not only from the significant cost savings, the biggest findings was the successful housing retention, that these folks who haven't been stably housed in some cases because they were the most vulnerable chronically homeless for 20, 25 years, or after the study, were living stably in the permanent supportive housing development well after 2 years. Incomes increased, their benefits, their health increased, and it was all led to the intensive housing stability and services coordination that was partnered between the permanent supportive housing provider, say our applicants, and the services community. This one goes to the next step of taking what we've learned from pilot point 1.0, as Marissa said, really focusing on the chronically homeless, and again, looking at how do we best pair our resources to most effectively serve these most vulnerable households, is we wanted to focus on another vulnerable population that has been underutilized and has been high utilizers of both local services as well as state resources. And these are the behavioral health consumers, for the most part, persons with serious mental illness, who aren't literally homeless, but they are high utilizers of crisis stabilization services. They're in and out of the hospital because they don't have stable supports. They don't have stable housing. They may be couch serving. They may be homeless for a few days. Then they'll go back to their parents' house. The parents do not have the capacity to address an adult with severe and mental illness, and so the cycle just continues. The first pilot, again, served chronically homeless persons who are served by a different services population and different services funding, more through the homeless assistance or the homeless continuum of care system. The second pilot will be, again, focusing on those who aren't literally homeless, so they can't be served by the homeless resources. So it's really being served by the managing entity or behavioral health system services that have resources to assist, again, these households who aren't literally homeless. So I can, and we don't know yet because we're going through the RFA development process. As Marissa said, we're looking to fund up to 3 pilot sites. We would like, and again, because of the pilot studies and how we're structuring the methodology and what we want the results from, we're looking at 3 different supportive housing providers or our applicants working with 3 different MEs, and there's 7 MEs or managing entities, behavioral health managing entities that are designated by the Department of Children and Family across the state. So the managing entity would have to be paired with the permanent supportive housing provider in that location where they both serve. So we will be, again, as we workshop that, we will be looking to, hopefully, again, as it's such a diverse state, is have kind of 3 distinct applicants working with 3 distinct
Okay,
managing
thank you, Bill.
entities.
I just had one more question. How large is the need? Do you have an idea of what the need is for?
Well, I can say we just, as you may have seen in the informational section of the packet, we have just completed our needs assessment or housing needs assessment for persons with special needs and homeless households. That was a statewide assessment working with a number of stakeholders, both state agencies as well as providers who serve many populations in the homeless or subpopulations in the homeless population, as well as persons with special needs. Again, we had a third-party researcher, but we had a advisory work group of representatives of state coalitions, relevant or respective coalitions, Department of Children and Families, Agency for Persons with Disabilities, advocates, and our stakeholder community. And to get to your question, the results were quite shocking. There are 157,000 individuals in the state of Florida that are unstably housed that meet 1 or 2 of those, homeless with special needs, veterans with special needs, homeless veterans. So we tried to kind of take it another level down than how we do our 3-year or triennial market study and delve more into the characteristics and the needs of these individuals and households. And we found that the study found that about 8% of the 157,000 individuals need permanent supportive housing, at least initially over a couple years because many persons who go into permanent supportive housing, some that will be their most optimal housing for the rest of their life, but many, they move on then to general occupancy, home ownership, living, in other areas. So it was 8% of the 157,000 needed permanent supportive housing, and this is kind of like a point in time study, and then the additional 92,000 needed basically affordable housing, where they were accessing their needs either from a community service provider, or that was as such as they just needed to get out of homelessness. And then once they were in stable, affordable housing and were assisted and they had housing they could afford and some support, then they were independent and not needed. So that's
So it's a big need.
12,000.
Yeah.
12,000
Plus.
individual, 12,000 plus people need permanent. Wow, okay.
Okay.
And this is my last question, promise. So this is pilot 2.0. Is this moving towards some type of permanent program in the minds of the corporation, or?
What we're hoping to do, and I said this has kind of been a charge from the board now for 7 or 8 years, and it has been quite interesting kind of taking these two silos, basically the housing world and the services world, to really focus on serving households with special needs. And the real goal was building the relationships not only between us and other state agencies and even federal partners, but really working on kind of developing the capacity or helping our nonprofits and our other private stakeholders in the community start promoting relationships with the services providers, the services funders, again, so the housing provider is not also being the one providing or paying for the services, or the housing funder not paying for the services. Really figuring out how to braid these and figuring out, it's really about everything from partnering to share data, to really figure out what the need is, to coordinate processes as how it would be best for the two entities to work together to serve these households in need. And the goal is to learn from our lessons, utilize best practices and then information to hopefully replicate this throughout the state. So I wouldn't see it as a new program. I would see it as a way that, you know, we would incorporate things into our RFAs as incentives or requirements. But again, the focus would be, which I've worked a lot in my term here, is to figure out, you know, we can't do everything. We should be focusing on prioritizing the use of our housing resources. But what we are charged to do is figure out how best to effectively work together to maximize the resources so we can help stably house these individuals in the communities and then help them toward greater self-sufficiency, and not just a periodic or episodic, but long-term stability.
Anything further? We'll call Bill or Marissa. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor of staff recommendation?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Okay. Bill? Are you-
You might have a little easier time. I tend to talk slow. Folks usually ask me to speed up. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. This next item is a request for the board to approve the allocation plan for the Home Investment Partnerships Program, or HOME, funded through the American Rescue Plan Act. So from here on, I'll be referring to this as HOME ARP. A little bit of background: the American Rescue Plan Act is a federal economic stimulus bill that was passed by the U.S. Congress and signed into law last March 11th of 2021. The legislation provided $5 billion from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, for the Home Investment Partnerships Program. And according to this act, the Home AR funding shall be used to assist homeless and unstably housed households through one or more of the following activities. And these activities are the funding for the development and support of affordable housing as currently permitted under the HOME program. So it's important to say that these requirements from HOME ARP follow the requirements of our standard HOME program as administered by David Westcott's shop and home ownership. It's also can be used for tenant-based rental assistance. It can be used for supportive services, as well as acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter units, which may be converted into permanent affordable housing, used as emergency shelters or remain as non-congregate shelter units. The Act and HUD has dedicated $251 million for the state of Florida. Of that, $72 million went to Florida Housing as the state's participating jurisdiction for home. The remainder of that $250 million go out to the local participating jurisdictions that administer home in their local areas. And that tends to be counties and large cities within counties. As I said, we, in particular, specifically, Florida Housing was awarded $71,903,340. The timeline for the use of the funds, as we were referencing earlier, the funds must be obligated for eligible activities no later than September 30th of 2025. Funds may be drawn for expenditures no later than September 30, 2030. So as you see, there's some time restrictions. And what we are so pleased with as others, state HFAs and maybe other participating jurisdictions, is we are looking and we will be coming back through to you all as once the plan's approved by HUD and addressing how we see distributing this funding. But a lot of it will be distributed through our traditional RFA process. So we have the infrastructure already set up, and we may be also doing we're looking at some due diligence of doing some unique things if it meets the requirements of the guidance concerning how to possibly assist projects in the pipeline, looking at shovel-ready projects, and again, looking at ways that we can effectively and efficiently move through the time commitments. Last September, HUD released the guidance and requirements for the use of the Home ARP program funds. The notice or the guidance provided information regarding the qualified populations to be served, instructions for completing the allocation plan, eligible uses, and activities under the home program, as well as it took, a fair amount of time, but thank goodness we had the expertise of David Westcott and his staff on helping us through those regulations and really working through some of the unique nuances regarding this home ARP funding, which again, we'll be coming back to you and talking more specifically in the future. Upon the release of the guidance, the Florida Housing staff immediately began working on the development and submission plan coordination. Staff determined that specific items were required by HUD to develop, request approval, and implement the plan for allocation of these Florida Housing's Home ARP funds. We came to the board in October of 2021, and the board approved staff's request to engage in the required consultation and public participation or input process, again, to develop the plan for submission to HUD. Staff agreed at that time that after its due diligence, it would provide a final draft to the board for approval, again, before we would then move on to work with the Department of Economic Opportunity to submit the plan to HUD under the required process. The present situation is, again, following the board approval to move forward. In October, Florida Housing staff, first thing we did is created, as required by HUD, a home ARP page on its website as a place to be able to provide all the information concerning the guidance, the requirements of home ARP, the uses, but also as a way of a depository of the public comments submitted and any information that we provide or recordings of the consultation workshops and the hearings that we provided. So that's all available for the public and stakeholders to take advantage of. And again, we started, even before the consultation, we started the workshops, or planning the workshops, but also soliciting input, and really spent a lot of time sending out a lot of, not just through the listserv, but sending out a lot of notices and information to a very broad stakeholder community who would serve the eligible populations. Our initial consultation workshop was held last month, and 190 individuals representing 100 different organizations participated in the workshop. And again, the action item included Exhibit A, which includes a copy of the agenda. We also, after that, solicited feedback from key stakeholders, from affordable rental and permanent supportive housing developers, providers, advocacy groups. We had to solicit input from public housing agencies, homeless continuum of care, veterans groups, and advocates, as well as providers of assistance and housing for survivors of domestic violence, and really kind of not a new population, but a population that we've been really struggling to figure out how to reach, and that's working to provide stable housing for persons who have been trafficked, which continues to be a major issue. Participants were asked to share any additional input by December 14th to include in the draft of the home allocation plan. And then on the 17th, the staff posted a draft of the plan and allowed 22 days for public review and input. And upon that, our last step in the process was holding a public hearing workshop, which we held on January 11th, to review any written public comments provided, as well as accept any public comments offered during this public hearing. So as you can see, there has been a lot of activity since we received the guidance from HUD, but we think we want to be very broad and participatory, as well as transparent in the process, but we also have to be sensitive to our timeframes, so that our hope is that if the board approves, we would move on to working with the Department of Economic Opportunity very soon, and then move on to submitting the plan as soon as possible. The last thing that I wanted to cover is just you would have seen it in your packet, but the staff proposed to allocate through this process and through public input, staff proposed to allocate 86.9% of the funding, or $62.5 million, to the development of affordable rental housing, $5 million or 7% toward tenant-based rental assistance, and $4.4 million or 6.1% for administrative cost. The administrative costs are expected to not only assist with staff cost and cost for compliance, which will be a big component, as you can imagine, but also to provide technical assistance to help nonprofits build capacity as housing providers, but also working with external TA providers as well as staff to be a liaison between, for example, multifamily staff, credit underwriters, and the applicant, again, with the focus of being sensitive to our times, as well as sensitive to getting, in these days, getting the deal done and getting the units available as possible. So we would have this TA to help move the deal along throughout the process. So the recommendation is to approve the allocation plan and the staff's request to work with the Department of Economic Opportunity to submit the application plan to HUD as part of the substantial amendment to the Florida Consolidated Plan.
Okay, I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. A discussion. I've got one question. You said it has to be done by 2025. Are you talking about the money allocated or projects in service?
The money allocated.
I just have a comment. I think this will be a great shot in the arm for our commitment to rural Florida. We do a lot of money. We do a lot of work with our home program in rural Florida, which, as you know, we have a commitment to do and build more housing, which they're in desperate need of. So look forward to your recommendation and the approval by DEO and HUD and moving ahead.
Okay. Anybody else? David? You have- Nobody else? Okay. A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Okay. I just, you're getting ready to go.
I am. I'm out of here in 60 seconds.
Any comment before you?
Nope.
Okay. All right, then we have public comment.
I need to get
Is
closer.
that better?
Nope.
Can I just talk real loud?
Yes, you can.
Okay, hi, I'm Shannon Nasworth, President and CEO of Ability Housing. We were one of the pilot sites for Pilot 1.0, and I wanted to let you know how incredibly impactful that pilot was, not just at the state level with legislators and them understanding, but also working with other state agencies and helping them realize how they can use the resources better, but also at the local level with our local government and other businesses in the community, helping to bring more resources to affordable housing.
Shannon, go sit at an open spot at the table.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So I just was saying that the Pilot 1.0 was incredibly impactful, bringing other resources and awareness of the need for affordable housing throughout the Jacksonville community. We were the Duval lead. I also want to offer, if any of you ever want to come visit the pilot site, we are very welcome, or any of our other properties. We have 6 properties in Duval County, 2 in Orange, 1 in Osceola, all of which have at least some of the units set aside for the homeless and persons with special needs. And be very happy to give anyone a tour and help really explain how this works, how the leveraging with the service dollars, other resources, and the cost savings. Our particular pilot saw a 30% reduction in public expenditures, comparing the 2 years before our residents moved into housing with the 2 years after. They saw an average $244 a month increase in their income, and obviously their health and mental health improved dramatically. So the impacts were real at both the systems level, the local level, and the individual level. And I really just want to thank Florida Housing for continuing this work, because it really is having major impacts in all of our communities. I also work with the Supportive Housing Coalition. I'm a board member there, and we are working with other nonprofits around the state to try and help them learn how to do this so we can be replicating this in every community in our state. And I just want to let you know, if there's any time you would like a tour, if you would like to meet other members of the Supportive Housing Coalition, whatever we can do to help you learn more about this, because what Florida is doing and what Florida Housing Finance is doing really is a lead within the country, and it should be commended, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you, Shannon. And
Chair, question, is it, Mr. Chair?
yes, go ahead.
How many residents does the Jacksonville 1.0 serve?
The site itself that you constructed is 43 units, but we did 90 participants in the pilot overall using other sites that we own, as well as we have 100 scattered sites that where we master lease units in the community. So we had a combination of all of those in the pilot.
Thank you.
And if you haven't had a chance to see some of their projects, I mean, it's a wonder what they do.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, so for the board members and folks in attendance, our next meeting will be here on March 4th. That'll be towards the end of the legislative session. That's, I think, in the week leading up to the end, not the week, so a week out, if that makes sense. So we will hopefully be in this room, and we'll have hopefully a great update for our legislation and the budget. So thank you all for coming all this way. We look forward to seeing you back here in about 6 weeks, and have a safe trip home.
Sandra would like a little warmer weather.
Yes, we'll order that.
Warmer weather, please.
Any other board member have anything? Okay, seeing none, we're adjourned.